Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We're happy to welcome a new contributor. Evan Cecchini joins us. Evan, first of all, congratulations on being a contributor to Young Voices. Would you take just a moment, tell us a little bit about who you are and maybe some of the hats that you wear?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. I'm a junior at Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia. I'm a double major in politics and business, and I'm from Lewisburg, Pennsylvania.
Well, we've got a great topic to cover here, a very timely one, and this is based on an article that you have published in the W&L Spectator, How Conservatives Can Win the Corporate Culture War. And the first thing I have to ask you is, what has happened in corporate culture? It seems like corporations are falling over each other, trying to signal how enlightened, I was going to use the word woke, but I'll stick with enlightened, they are in this day and age. Even if it costs them, in terms of their brand, what's behind that?
Certainly. I'd have to assume that, we can never know for sure. We can't, pick into the minds of the executives at Bud Light and North Face, but we'd have to assume that, they're competent businessmen and they think that pandering to progressives is, what could drive their profits in the future.
Interesting. I mean, in the article, Dylan Mulvaney and Bud Light is featured, and I think that's a perfect example of Bud Light spent decades building their brand as, this is the average guy, the working man's beer, and then they brought in Dylan Mulvaney, and I'm not trying to judge somebody's character here, but that's about as far from the icon or the image of a working man, that anybody could think of, and it seems like it costs Bud Light quite a bit, but still. Other corporations persist in this, and it's curious. It just seems like in the last few years, this has become not only a bit of a trend, but almost a necessity if you want to survive in the corporate world.
Oh, certainly. It's almost like they're caving in to pressure from, the far left, I'd call it. Most consumers, I'll tell you, probably don't care at all. They don't care if a transgender activist is promoting their beer or not. So the progressives kind of, try to take advantage of that and use their wallets to push corporations to try to adopt their views.
So it seems like with Bud Light in particular, there were a lot of people who boycotted, and I mean very openly. Even some fairly famous people boycotted, although it appears some of them may have walked that back as they've been seen, drinking a Bud Light here and there. Kid Rock, I'm looking in your direction. But is there a way for the consumer to exert influence on these companies that persist in promoting kind of a woke public image?
Certainly. I would say vote with your wallet. If you see a corporation that is promoting something that, you don't take too kindly to, stop buying their products. Tell your friends to stop buying their products. Tell everyone to stop buying their products. But, I do like free market society, and the way that we pick and choose is with our money.
Yeah, it's one of the few options that's left to us right now. It seems like so many other things are mandatory. When we vote with our wallets, though, does it really send the message that, for instance, boycotters are trying to send? Sometimes it seems like there's a short-term gain. Does it have any long-term effect, though, on the direction many of these corporations seem to be headed?
Sometimes it does. Where you get to see Bud Light and Anheuser-Busch, they are failing. In the short term, they're still experiencing the effects of the cultural pushback from their campaign with Dylan Mulvaney. But really, to be honest, we've yet to see in the long term how it will affect them. But so far, it's been working.
It just seems like things that go up quickly tend to come down quickly. And my perception is this has gone up pretty quickly, but as far as I can tell, it's nowhere near, stopping. What about ESG? And for those who don't understand what ESG is, why have so many companies embraced ESG philosophy as it pertains to how they invest?
Yeah, certainly. So just a little bit more about ESG. It stands for Environmental, Social, and Corporate Governance Funds. And there are these certain funds that corporations can put out and invest in to promote what they think is, for social welfare, for the good of the world. Um, some people call these woke funds, and they have been performing terribly. They've been hemorrhaging money. These corporations are pumping capital into them, and they just continue to lose money.
So it again, it raises the question, why would companies do this? I mean, I know it's not every company, but it seems like the perception, at least from where I'm sitting, is that the majority of big companies, if they wish to remain competitive or if they wish to remain in good standing with polite society, they seem to embrace this. And I just wonder where that pressure comes from. If it's not coming from the consumers, then where does it originate?
My guess would be the very few vocal voices on the left. They're tiny, but they're mighty, and they'll scream and scream until they get their way. And these corporations figure that the only way to cave into them and cancel culture itself is to listen, unfortunately.
Interesting. Are you aware of any companies that have just very openly pushed back and said, no, we're not going to do that?
I can't name any off the top of my head. How about you?
I can't. I mean, that's to me why it seems like there's something more here than just simply, well, this is just a social awakening and people are finally, seeing things as they really are. There's some kind of pressure, but I have no idea where it originates. But I mean, these companies are putting millions and millions of dollars on the line sometimes in order to portray that woke, image, or put that face, forward towards America. Look how enlightened we are. And it to me, it doesn't make sense. I have to wonder where it comes from and, what the dynamic is behind it.
No, certainly. It's very concerning.
So what do you see as far as when you look into this? Obviously, there's been some pushback. Consumers are not helpless, right? We can vote with our wallets. Is this a trend that can continue? Is it sustainable? Or is it going to reach a point where the diminishing returns won't make it worthwhile? I mean, are we seeing any of these companies going out of business?
Well, I think it depends on how tolerant the public is on what these corporations are willing to do. In reality, not everyone is as politically active as we make it out to be. Most people are independents. Most people don't vote. And so it really depends on whether they care if, their favorite clothing brand is promoting their jacket with the transgender activists. So it really comes down to them.
Interesting. Yeah, I just have to wonder if this is something that people will eventually, corporations will come to their senses, or if it's just that's the price of doing business. And I don't want to sound conspiratorial, but do the lending institutions that they depend on for lines of credit or to handle their money and their commerce, are they the ones that become kind of de facto enforcers? Well, we can't do business with you if you're not, this enlightened.
Oh, certainly. They have, with the capital that they hold, they have an infinite amount of power. I think they're finally starting to realize that they can push whatever views they want on the companies that they lend to because they have that money.
Well, it just, I hate to sound like an old timer, but I'm just hearkening back to the days where you made your shopping decisions based on this is the best product for the best price. And it seemed like there was no pressure on the companies to make a political stand. That seems to be a fairly recent development. And it seems like it started with environmental awareness. This is a sustainable company that's making sustainable products. And that's fine, but it's veered into a part of the culture that, for lack of a better phrase, is just getting weirder by the minute. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's just 20 years ago, you tell someone that they've politicized the pancake mix and the syrup at the grocery store. They wouldn't believe you. But today, somehow, we've managed to make everything a political argument, depending on what beer you buy what pancake syrup you purchase. It's really ridiculous.
Yeah, it to me it's a symptom of a larger problem. The larger problem being there's something really unhealthy that's happening in society, and I don't know exactly what the origin is, but it's sure playing out in ways that it complicates our choices as consumers. Again, we're talking with Evan Cecchini. Tell everybody where they can find you on social media and where they can follow your work.
You can find me at Evan Cecc on pretty much everything. And I'm also an editor at the WNLspectator.com.
Great to visit with you, Evan. I hope we get a chance to talk again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. I have another new contributor to Young Voices I'd like to introduce to you. His name is Jacob. Jacob, I'm going to butcher your name on the first try. Posik?
That's pretty. It's pronounced as a Z, Posik. But
Posik.
That is pretty good.
Okay, thank you.
I've heard before.
Jacob is coming to us from the great state of Maine. And Jacob, if you take just a moment, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
My name is Jake Posik. I'm the Director of Legislative Affairs at Maine Policy Institute. Maine Policy is a free market think tank up here in the state of Maine, focusing on all things happening under the dome in Augusta.
Very nice. Now, I have to ask this because I've never been to Maine yet, although I just think I just added that to my bucket list. But what is the makeup of Maine? Would you describe it? Is it a purple state? Is it a solid blue state? Is it a solid red state? I'm not quite sure where it might fall.
I would say it's purple, but right now it is definitely under blue control. Our governor is Democratic Governor Janet Mills. Both chambers of our legislature are controlled by Democrats, though it's pretty close in the House. But Maine is very cyclical. It flips back and forth. There was total Republican control as early as 2010, and then we've had sort of divided legislatures since then, with the exception of the last like four years.
Okay. I appreciate that as it sets the stage for the discussion that I hope to have with you about your article on how climate action causes more harm than good for Mainers. And when we talk about climate action, what does that entail? What kind of policies might that look like?
Well, there's a lot of different iterations of that in the state of Maine, but the one that I was singling out for the purpose of this article was Maine was recently faced with pending EV mandates. Because we're what's known as a CARB state, we've bound ourselves to the California Air Resources Board. When California has the bright decision of enacting really strict mandates, it prompts a regulatory review in Maine. And so we actually had previously considered what's known as the Advanced Clean Cars Rule, which is, just think of it as electric vehicle mandates. We actually reviewed those as a state in 2021 and we decided not to. But Maine has this really obscure provision in law that allows groups to petition. If you get 150 signatures, you can force an executive branch agency in the state of Maine to consider the adoption of a rule. So there was a group of environmental organizations that had decided that Maine should reconsider this rule that we already shot down a couple of years ago. And that's why Maine was forced to sort of reconsider the adoption of electric vehicle mandates in Maine.
Interesting. Even though the East Coast, I think, kind of sometimes gets a little bit of a stereotype of it's primarily blue, but that's probably down along the eastern seaboard and into the Washington D.C. area. I always think of Maine as being a little more, do I dare say, common sense? These are people who are living in the real world. If I understand correctly, don't a lot of people in Maine heat their houses, with either wood or with fuel oil?
Yeah, so we like to call it the two Maines, if you will. So our first congressional district in southern Maine, closer to Portland, Maine, which is our biggest city. It's a very comparatively small city to other U.S. cities, but that is a totally different world than the second congressional district. Northern Maine is very rural. Maine, but people don't realize how big Maine is. Maine is so big you can fit the rest of New England within it. We have a longer coastline than California when you consider all of the islands, inlets, outlets, peninsulas, so on and so forth. So Maine is very big. It's very rural. It is very common sense. It's very old-fashioned. When you get to central and northern Maine, those people live in a totally different world than those in southern Maine.
Interesting. Well, the California standards, and I know California is like boldly leading the way in climate awareness. It's interesting to hear that's something that's been embraced by Maine's state government. Talk to me about some of the lessons from some of the storms that came through and had impact on the electrical system in Maine. Was there anything learned from that experience?
Well, I think there was because what's funny is as Maine was considering these rules, those groups that I had mentioned had submitted these petitions last year. So this has been a process that's been ongoing for about the last 6 months or so here in Maine. And while the board was accepting public comment and preparing to deliver a decision on these rules, we actually had a really bad ice storm that knocked out power to like more than half of the state. So it's actually really funny to have a government agency that is considering mandating adoption of electric vehicle mandates, and they have to postpone the vote because half of the state is without power. And I think, that's obviously a funny story, but I think that that did have an impact in addition to just there was widespread and massive public pushback to this. The Board of Environmental Protection took a straw poll around that time showing that they were by a vote of 4-2 in favor of this thing. And then when they actually cast their vote last month in March on whether or not the state should adopt this, they voted 4-2 in reverse to discontinue rulemaking on this subject, which is a tremendous win for the people of Maine.
Wow. Talk to me a little bit about however well intended these green policies are, they come at a cost to the population. In other words, there are things that we have to give up in order to meet those carbon goals or to access clean energy. Who is most deeply affected by those kinds of policies?
Well, in my view, it's those who are most disadvantaged among us. I mean, if you're requiring somebody to purchase an electric vehicle, even with the subsidies and stuff that are available at the state and federal levels, if they're available based on whichever version of a EV that you're buying, this is still far more expensive than a traditional gas-powered vehicle, especially if you're buying something that's used versus new. So that's an issue in and of itself. But then you think about what sort of infrastructure do you need to make this happen? If you're a renter in Portland, Maine, for example, you live in a big apartment building, where are you charging your EV overnight? And then if you have a long commute to work, where do you charge your EV along the way? So you're talking about massive private investment for individuals to keep up with these rules, to be able to, charge their car overnight, if you will. Public investment to ensure that if this mandate were actually adopted, people would be able to, seamlessly charge their car as they can go to a gas station now. And that's a lot of money. That's a lot of taxpayer dollars that you're talking about. And it really doesn't make sense to start putting mandates in the way before any of that infrastructure actually exists.
That's a good point. And I've heard rumors, you can either dispel or confirm these. I've heard that Maine can be cold during the winter
Yeah.
months. And cold
Yeah.
takes a big toll on the storage capacity of electric vehicles. In other words, you can lose up to 25% of your charge overnight in a really cold night.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that sort of helps underscore exactly why. Forget about the cost, forget about the infrastructure concerns. Regardless of your take on climate change and EV adoption and so on and so forth, it is so much more impractical to own one of these things than it is in California, for example, for exactly that reason. You're going to lose range. You're going to get yourself in a sticky situation trying to get from A to B. And it's worth noting in this same line that Mainers have some of the longest commutes in the country, like on a daily basis, just to get to and from work. So that makes a tremendous difference, that lost charge because of weather.
Wow. And in addition to this, I have to ask, where does the electricity, what generates the electricity that people would be using to charge their electric vehicles? Is it strictly solar? Is it wind? Is it wave power? Or are they using fossil fuel powered plants, natural gas or coal to generate that electricity?
I believe the New England grid is still probably majority powered by natural gas. All of the New England states are moving in this direction in terms of trying to go solar, go green. The last thing I do want to mention, though, before we have to wrap up, is that as a result of that pushback and the board vote, the legislature of Maine actually adopted a new law that was just signed by Governor Mills that requires any future EV mandates to be approved by the legislature. So not only did we kill this from a regulatory standpoint, we changed the rulemaking standard now such that unelected bureaucrats in Augusta can't force you to buy EVs. This is something that lawmakers will have to sign off on in the future, which is a huge victory.
All right, again, we are talking with Jacob Posik. And Jacob, where can people follow you on social media? Where can they find your work?
They can find my work on mainepolicy.org, and same thing, you can search Maine Policy on Twitter.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. This is our third segment of today's show, and we are happy to welcome a new contributor. His name is Brett Patrick. Brett, first of all, welcome aboard, and secondly, take a moment here to tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Of course. Well, thank you, Brian, for having me on today. I am first and foremost a student at Binghamton University, where I am studying political science and history. And in addition to being a contributor for Young Voices, I am a campus ambassador for the American Conservation Coalition, which advocates for limited and responsible government in regards to environmental policy. And ultimately, this passion for limited and responsible government prompted me to touch in on tobacco regulation in my article.
I just like the sound of that, limited and responsible government, because it seems like it's such a rare thing. It's, you know, it's that rare hidden gem that we look for but rarely find. Now, in particular, I'm looking at an article you wrote for AmericanThinker.com about vaping, why bans don't work. And I know there are various bans that are being proffered in various states, but kind of paint the picture for us. Where are these bans happening? What is the intention behind banning vaping?
Well, definitely. And I first want to make it clear that although I disagree in how these politicians, mostly of the Democratic Party, are pursuing reducing tobacco use among younger adults, it's unfortunately the wrong way and ill-informed. So these politicians, mostly of the Democratic Party, believe that limiting tobacco use, particularly banning flavored tobacco, will reduce tobacco use among younger adults. So in the United States, it costs about almost $200 billion in lost productivity because of tobacco use. And these politicians believe that banning them outright will sort of alleviate this concern. So in Massachusetts in 2019, they banned flavored tobacco, and California followed suit in 2022. And in the most recent legislative sessions, 8 states are following through as well. And this is very concerning to me because I believe that more government is actually counterproductive in tackling these concerns.
Yeah, it seems like the demand remains, regardless of what politicians say. Even with evidence, from the Surgeon General, hey, this is not good for you. Smoking has persisted for many generations, although it seems like there's more information out there than there was before. Why is it that using the force of the state to enact bans somehow falls short?
Yeah, definitely. And we can actually look at history. I think history answers our question. So, of course, the most prominent example of government trying to ban products in order to reduce its use would be alcohol in the 1900s during Prohibition. And we see during the 18th Amendment, instead of actually reducing alcohol use, there's a large pushback against it. And of course, the 21st Amendment reversed the 18th Amendment, thus legalizing alcohol again. And right now, we also see in these states such as Massachusetts and California, smuggling rates have surged, even though tobacco use has remained relatively stable. So this has inadvertently fostered underground markets and sort of exacerbated the harms associated with tobacco use. So instead of having a more targeted approach, not using the means of government is actually sort of exacerbating the problem.
Well, and it provides some really perverse incentives. When you induce artificial scarcity, of course, the price of things goes up, and therefore it is more profitable for smugglers or others, to try to meet that demand. And, I guess one thing we learned from Prohibition was the beer truck drivers of today don't shoot each other over which store carries their product. That doesn't mean it's good for you to drink, but at least if you have a legal avenue through which to get it, there's no need for conflict, which it usually comes from the inflated, prices.
Yeah, definitely. And there are ways to reduce tobacco use. So this is the noble goal, and it's something that we should prioritize, reducing tobacco use. But rather than blanket bans, these policymakers and politicians should focus on balancing public health objectives while valuing individual freedoms. I think it's so often ignored that people sometimes use flavored tobacco to quit smoking in a goal to eventually not use tobacco products anymore. And unfortunately, these legislators are largely ignoring that.
Now, you point out that there is a state, though, that seems to be having reasonable success in bringing down the youth tobacco rate. Talk to me about what Utah is doing and why it seems to be working.
Yeah. So certainly Utah is basically, in my view, the gold standard of how we should be approaching this issue. So in addition to Utah, there's numerous other states that have increased their funding for tobacco prevention programs, which unfortunately these prohibition-friendly states have not. In Utah, we see that they have a multifaceted approach towards tobacco use. So a combination of public health anti-vaping campaigns, community engagement, and sort of actively discouraging tobacco use has diverted its use. They also emphasize healthy lifestyles, which has contributed to its tobacco prevention efforts. So through education and advocacy, Utah is doing it right. They're able to reduce tobacco use among the youth while allowing responsible adults to continue using it, but also fostering a sense of community that disencourages its use, which is ultimately going to improve healthy lifestyles while understanding that Americans are responsible and they know what's best for their lives.
And I know it's anecdotal, but I've talked to a number of people personally who were smokers, who wanted to quit, and who swear up and down by switching to vaping, it gave them the necessary stair steps to step away from tobacco without having to just quit cold turkey, which I understand is extremely difficult.
And definitely. And unfortunately, a lot of these politicians are not acknowledging that reality. It's definitely great to focusing on youth and their youth. Unfortunately, about 13% of all youth in America use tobacco products, and that is a concern. However, viewing it through only one lens and only using bans as a means to reduce use, number one, is ill-informed, but it also has proven not to work. In California, we're still seeing rates of tobacco use continue, but smuggling has increased, and what they're doing is purchasing tobacco products outside of the state and simply just bringing it into the state that way. In addition, there's various loopholes, such as e-commerce, where they're able just to buy these products online. So it's just going to make it harder for law-abiding, responsible adults to quit smoking, and it just continues tobacco use among the youth.
Wait, so you're suggesting that creating more criminals isn't the answer? I appreciate how you put it, though. The tobacco companies, I have to ask this, they have been under fire for quite some time, and yet they still seem to be profitable, as in they're still in business. What culpability do they have? And I guess it really comes down to, do they have a right to continue to sell a product that is known to cause harm?
I think it's interesting that that question is often posed to tobacco companies, but not necessarily to the alcohol companies. And I think that it should not necessarily be promoted. Of course, these are mostly harmful substances. However, I have faith that people will make responsible choices that best suit them. And that should be the same for everyone. Although we may not necessarily agree with the effects that it has, I think trusting people to make those choices for themselves will ultimately be best for them.
Amen. No, I applaud you. That is precise. Because where does it stop? Too much red meat is not good for you either. And I'm certainly not going to back, well, we ought to ban it then, or we ought to have some kind of law that makes it very difficult to get it. It comes down to individual choices, and I want people to make good choices, but it seems like when we get government involved, suddenly it becomes politicized, and then it becomes a power struggle, and intentions always seem to outweigh the actual results when it comes to how politicians approach problems.
Definitely. And we have a deep, not only history going back 100 years ago, proving that point, but already 3 years after Massachusetts passed their bills, we're already seeing the negative consequence that it has. And California was only passed in 2022. We're already seeing that there's loopholes, the e-commerce loophole, for example, as I stated. So these politicians are unfortunately ill-informed. However, there is hope. In Vermont, the state legislature recently had passed a tobacco ban, but the Republican governor actually vetoed it, citing that it was too broad and it was going to be ineffective. So there definitely is hope that these pieces of legislation can be stopped.
Well, Brett, you're giving me hope that common sense may actually prevail at some point, so keep up the good fight.
Definitely.
Again, we are talking with Brett Patrick. He is a Young Voices contributor. And Brett, for people who would like to follow you on social media or otherwise follow your work, what's the best way to do that?
The best way to do that would probably be through my LinkedIn. All of my publications and projects are on that website. If you type in Brett Patrick, it should be one of the first profiles that pop up. My Young Voices icon will be attached as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome back. This is our fourth and final segment today on Moving Forward with Young Voices. I am happy to welcome yet another contributor to the Young Voices program and to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Her name is Lucy Gay. Lucy, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thanks. So I grew up in Toronto. My family now lives in Ottawa, but I am currently at George Mason University in Virginia. And I'm graduating in a couple weeks now with my master's in economics. So really excited.
Well, congratulations first and foremost. And I'm excited to visit with you about an article that you've written for Real Clear Energy about Canada's green policies jeopardize economic and societal needs. And I'll admit, I've never heard of green roadwork before, but apparently that is a thing in Canada. Can you help me understand what is green roadwork like? How does it differ from traditional roadwork?
Well, really what the article is talking about a statement that Guilbeault, the Minister of Climate Change, came out with at the beginning of March, where he says that the Trudeau government will stop funding roads infrastructure, building roads in Canada. And this was quite shocking to many people, especially because Guilbeault is from Montreal, and Montreal is not known for their wonderful roads. So yeah, basically Guilbeault came out with a pretty strong statement about defunding roads. There's been a lot of pushback against this statement. So he's fumbled around a little bit. He kind of walked the statement back a little bit, saying, "Oh, I didn't really say that." And then he said, "Oh, actually, I did say that, but that's not what I meant." And then he said, "I did say that, but actually, I was just talking about Quebec." So no one really knows actually what he means there. But honestly, I mean, I think the article's still kind of relevant today because I think Guilbeault is still pushing these top-down bans. This past week, he's promoting his new plastic registry. So he's been trying to ban plastics, single-use plastics, which he's done so successfully. But actually in January, the government's own analysis came out and said that actually the single-use plastic bans is creating more pollution.
Wow.
Than, yeah, you wouldn't think. But I guess the replacements are actually just as bad, if not worse, than the single-use plastics. So yeah, I mean, I think he's banning everything that he thinks might get in the way of net zero. And yeah, all these unintended consequences are coming as a result. So I'm hoping that we don't see too much more from his road banning. But yes, he did make that statement. So
is the underlying purpose behind that road banning to discourage driving and thereby, bring down the carbon emissions?
Yeah, so the purpose of banning the roads is because he wants to lower the amount of cars that are being driven. and therefore lower the emissions, which is, I mean, Canada contributes a very marginal, small amount of emissions to the global emissions. And I think really that's what Canada should be focusing on right now with their environmental policy is how can they help globally decrease emissions? And I mean, this is a little bit, I didn't cover this in the paper, but something that they should be doing is, LNG exporting. There have been in the past decade, I think 18, almost 20 proposed LNG exporting facilities that Trudeau's government has refused to permit to go ahead with, except for one. There's one, I think, actually, that's going to be coming at the end of next year. But focusing on just global emissions rather than just Canada's tiny little contribution and banning roads and making life much more inconvenient for Canadians. A lot of Canada is rural. So I think it really highlights his poor understanding of urban planning. Canada is also going through a pretty bad housing crisis.
Let's talk about
roads.
I'm sure the intentions are good. Look, we're just trying to ease up the pressure on the climate by slowing down, the carbon emissions, getting to this net zero. But there are consequences that come with that. Who are the people that are most affected negatively when these policies are implemented?
Well, just the everyday rural Canadians. It's really expensive to live downtown Ottawa, downtown Vancouver. Vancouver's been getting a lot of press recently about its housing prices and how horrible they are. And so decreasing road funding means that people who are living more rurally, who can't afford to, maybe buy downtown, are unable to reach those jobs. Cities are just the hub of employment. So not being able to have quick and easy transportation to and from the inner downtown core would mean that there'd be less employment opportunity for those who can't afford to live right in the city center.
But it doesn't sound like that'll affect people in high government positions, for instance. So,
oh no, exactly.
Not their problem.
I'm sure Gilbo will be fine. Right, exactly.
I have to give you high points for quoting Friedrich Hayek, and talk to us a little bit about the man of system, which Hayek rather refers to, and how Gilbo is behaving as a man of system.
Right. Well, Hayek always talks about how, we have to be wary of the fact that, we can't just move pieces and people around like a chessboard, like pieces on a chessboard, and how central control, you can kind of become overconfident in your role as politicians and feel that you know better. And so I think Gilbo is kind of demonstrating this with his, he loves cycling. He works from home, and maybe most Canadians don't have that luxury, and so he's trying to kind of direct things according to his own will, and not according to what other people and the real Canadians want.
Has he been in government for a long time?
He has, yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay, that's the reason I ask. I'm not trying to cast aspersions here, but sometimes it seems like the longer a person is a part of government, the more they start to believe their own press releases. In other words, they're a little disconnected from reality.
Totally, yeah.
So,
but yeah, I mean, ultimately, sorry.
Go ahead, please continue.
Ultimately, it seems like he, at the end of this, he doesn't want people to be driving on roads. Is he going to just want everyone? I mean, the most environmentally beneficial way to exist is just to stay at home and not to move at all. So sometimes you wonder, like, what is the end game here? If everything is about just decreasing emissions no matter what could that look like? Yeah.
That kind of looks like I live in a cave and I wash my clothes down on a rock by the river. I mean, that's a very carbon neutral kind of existence, but it doesn't sound like it would be much fun. Now, you mentioned in your article, this is also a cautionary tale for U.S. policymakers. In other words, they should probably learn some of the lessons that Canadians are right now learning.
Right. And I mean, Raymond D'Souza, who is, he's a journalist in Canada, he does actually do quite a bit of comparison with the US's roads. And actually the US is doing much better in terms of just road infrastructure in general. A lot of Canadian cities don't have what's called ring roads around cities, so you have to drive straight through them, like in Toronto. where most even just like moderately sized American cities have those. But yeah, I mean, the US should be looking to Canada to see kind of where these top down environmental policies lead them to. I know Biden earlier in the spring kind of did an all out ban on LNG exporting. And so there are so many unintended consequences that come from these kind of bans that are just completely top down. And so, yeah, if the US looks to Canada, they can totally see that.
Are there any voices of reason that stand out with, better or at least more flexible ideas of how to approach, good stewardship? In other words, we're not actively harming the climate, but at the same time, we're not negatively impacting the people who can least afford to bear the costs.
Right. And I guess I would again point to focusing on global emissions as the most reasonable way forward, and not just focusing on, being very insular about climate policy within Canada. And for instance, exporting LNG to European allies would be a great way to unburden them from the energy crisis that they're experiencing there, and also not, help them not have to depend on dictatorships, and so have access to Canadian LNG, which is very environmentally friendly, and doesn't use any kind of poor labor. But yeah, I definitely think that not having top-down policies and just focusing on global emissions rather than just Canadian emissions would be the best way and the most reasonable way to approach this.
How is this received by the public? Are people in Canada generally okay? We're going to do our part, or do they push back and say, hey, this is not the right approach?
He got a lot of pushback from this one comment. And I think that there isn't just enough people pushing back though publicly, which is why I was kind of hoping that, I would be able to contribute to those voices. But yeah, I think more Canadians need to realize what's actually going on, and what Gilbo's really saying, and what his intentions are. But most Canadians are very environmentally friendly and conscientious. But again, I think there needs to be more of a voice of reason, rather than just a promotion of top-down.
Again, we are talking with Lucy Gay. She is a Young Voices contributor and graduate student studying economics at George Mason University. Congratulations again on your graduation. Where can people follow you on social media?
I'm on Twitter, and also on Instagram, but mostly on Twitter. So thank you.